Okay, we're going to go through some practice audiograms to help you learn to interpret audiograms. So here's the first one. Before we do that, though, here are the parameters at the top. We're trying to determine the type of hearing loss. Is it sensorineural? Is it conductive? Or is it mixed? The degree. And the degree is always determined by, excuse me, where on the audiogram the air conduction scores fall. Okay, so options are mild, moderate, severe, profound. And then configuration, which is a little less important, but still in the learning process, we want you to get those. So take a look at the first one. Here you have, let me get my pen out. So here you have 20 dB being normal. Okay, so anything above this is considered normal. Some people use 25, it doesn't really matter. You have your air conduction scores here. You have your bone conduction scores here. They're masked, so they're little brackets, meaning that there was masking noise in the other ear when they were testing. Let's say the right side, they had masking in the left ear, and vice versa. For left side, they had masking in the right ear. So you have your air conduction scores are pretty much in this mild to moderate range here. So your air conduction scores or your bone conduction scores are within normal limits, but there is an air bone gap. So the type of loss for this one is conductive, because you have an air bone gap and your scores are within, your bone conduction scores are within a normal limit. So you have, in terms of degree, you have mild to moderate, and then configuration, you have flat. Excuse me. So, and it's in both ears. So I would call this a bilateral, meaning both ears, mild to moderate conductive hearing loss. And that's how I would define this one. Or I'd say it's a bilateral, mild to moderate, flat conductive hearing loss. Okay? So let's go to the next one. I'm trying to move. There we go. I don't see why it's not moving. Oh, I have to exit that. All right, let's look at audiogram 2. All right. So here we don't see any air bone gaps. Right? There's your bone conduction. Here's your air conduction scores. So there's no air bone gaps. So it can't be conductive or can't be conductive or mixed. It's in the down here in, let's say, this severe range. Okay. It's bilateral, meaning it's in both ears, and it's symmetrical. So, so I would call this a bilateral severe sensorineural hearing loss, or a severe sensorineural hearing loss bilaterally. Now down here we're asking you to look at each one separately, because some of them sorry, I have a cold. Some of them the right and left ears have different configurations and different levels. So so when you're doing it, you're going to say left ear, this is what you have, right ear. But if you were writing it for a report, that's how you would write it. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, here's audiogram 3. So this one you have different degrees of loss in the right ear and the left ear. So first thing to look at, here's the bone score for the right ear, and here's the bone score for the left ear. So one way you can always tell if it's a right or left bone score is if the, as my kids learn, the open end of the alligator's mouth is to the right, it's a right bone conduction score. Okay. If the hungry alligator is facing the left, it's a left bone conduction score. Okay. Same here. If it's a bracket facing to the right, it's a right score. If it's a bracket facing to the left, it's a left score. So you always look where the open part of the bone conduction score falls. Okay, so in the right ear, scores are around 30 to 40, right? So we have what we could call a mild to moderate sensory neural hearing loss, right? Because there's no air bone gaps there, right? In the left ear, we have a more moderate to severe sensory neural loss because there's no air bone gaps. Okay. All right, here's audiogram 4. Now, as we look at this one, a couple things to note. First thing that's very it's popping out, there's an air bone gap. Okay. And the air bone gap is in both ears because here you have the right bone conduction score, here you have the left bone conduction score. Okay. And it's more than 10, so it's 15 or more. So if your score is here at 70, bone conduction scores are at 50, that's a 20 dB gap. Okay. So we have the presence of air bone gaps. Now, the bone conduction scores are not in this normal range. Okay, so these scores here are not within the normal range, right? If they're within the normal range and there's a gap, that's a conductive loss. So here we have what's called a mixed loss. Okay, meaning that there's loss. There's loss by nerve, or the neural part of it, the sensory part of it here, because the bone conduction scores aren't normal. But then you have additional loss here because of some kind of external or middle ear problem. And that's where it becomes, that's why we use the term mixed. It's a combination of conductive and sensory neural. Now, in terms of degree and the whole thing, I would say this is a pretty much severe bilateral severe mixed hearing loss, or a severe mixed hearing loss bilaterally. Okay, let's do number 5 here. All right, I'm gonna get my pen back. Couple things to note. Again, here's that normal hearing line. So air conduction scores pretty much fall. There's a little bit of what we call asymmetry here in the higher frequencies. So this one you're not going to want to say, you're not going to want to give it the same label because there's a difference here in the high frequencies. So type of loss, obviously conductive because you have normal bone conduction scores. And then you have your air bone gap. Okay, so I would say for the left ear, you have a mild sloping to moderate conductive hearing loss in the left ear. And for the right ear, the circles, I would say you have a mild conductive hearing loss. And configuration, right ear is flat, left ear is sloping, slightly sloping. It's not precipitously sloping like that. All right, it has, but when you say you have a mild to moderate, that implies that it slopes down. But anyway, those are a little bit more advanced pieces of information. But that's audiogram 5. And we'll do more of these throughout the semester. So don't worry if it's not super clear. You will be able to do this. And then audiogram 6. So a couple things to look at. Immediately, you have air bone gaps, and you can see those, right? Everybody can see those. So you compare this one to this one, because this is the right bone, this is the right air conduction. Okay, so when you have, this is the right air conduction, or right bone conduction, this is the right air conduction, this is right bone because it's facing the right. Okay, so you can't just look at it. I mean, there's air bone gaps everywhere on this, but you have to look right to right, left to left. Okay, so excuse me. You have the presence of an air bone gap. The bone conduction scores are not within this normal range. You definitely don't have a conductive loss. You have a mixed loss. And so let's do them individually because they are different. So in the left ear, you have a moderate sloping to severe mixed hearing loss in the left ear. Moderate sloping to severe mixed hearing loss. In the right ear, you have a severe rising to moderate mixed hearing loss. Excuse me. So again, in the right ear, you have a severe rising to moderate mixed hearing loss. So hopefully this was helpful. We will go over it again and probably do some more audiograms in the future.